According to the Holy Bible, Abraham entertained 3 angels. When they later visited the city of Sodom, they were believed to be normal earthmen. When the Israelites left Egypt, an angel appeared as a pillar of fire and guided them to the mountain of Horeb. The prophet Elias ascended to heaven in a fiery chariot. Ezekiel described the apparition of a great cloud with raging fire engulfing itself. In its midst, like the color of amber, also from within it came 4 living creatures. They had the likeness of a man. St. Paul reminded the Hebrews that some have unwittingly entertained angels.
There is one instance which is echoed in the Bible, which is the story of Enoch being taken up to heaven to be with the gods. In the Bible, the statement is very brief about it. There's much more about it in the so-called books of Enoch, of which we have 2 versions that describe the voyage, actually 2 voyages. One time he came back to earth, another time he was taken to be with the divine beings. And this is really a version of a Sumerian tale, in this particular case of a person called Enme-Duran-Ki, which is a title given to him after the abduction or visitation, which means the master of the bond between heaven and earth. And it specifically says that, among other things, he was taught the secrets of mathematics, the secrets of the calendar, and the secrets of the movements of the planets.
It is said about Imhotep, the inventor of the hieroglyphs and architect of the first pyramid of Egypt, that he was a student of the Watchers who came down to earth in their celestial boats. Further references to these cosmic messengers are offered in the Vedas, the sacred scriptures of ancient India, which belong to the oldest written records in the history of mankind.
According to the Vedic literature, there are many different types of human-like beings living within the universe, and they're all descended from an original common ancestor. According to the Vedic writings, there has been communication between human beings and other types of human-like beings throughout the universe for thousands and thousands of years. This used to be, in fact, more common than it is now. According to the Vedic literature, we're now in a period called the Kali Yuga, in which communication between humans and higher forms of life is somewhat curtailed. So actually the idea is that this communication was much more extensive in the distant past.
Why did these contacts take place?
Well, there's the ultimate question of purpose boils down to the question of what is the ultimate purpose of life? Why did this universe come into being in the first place? The basic concept that you have in the Vedic literature, starting in the middle basically of the explanation, is that you have living beings who have spirit souls. The soul is the essence of the being, who are in a state of ignorance. These living beings are situated in bodies made of the material elements. And because of these material bodies, they don't understand the true nature of the self. So there's an evolutionary process whereby, through experience in the material world, in different material bodies, one can gradually elevate one's consciousness. So life on Earth also is a school, so to speak, in which living beings take bodies of human form on the Earth to undergo certain experiences which in due course will elevate their consciousness. So the purpose of communication from higher beings in the universe is to aid in this process, to give people instructions which will ultimately enable them to attain to a higher platform of consciousness. So the idea is that on the Earth, people are basically living in a state of ignorance, but from time to time, beings from the higher systems within the universe will come down to the Earth and transmit spiritual knowledge to the people here on the Earth. So in this way you have different religions developing. Of course, that's a very complex process because once knowledge is transmitted to this earth, then people begin to do things with that knowledge. And so you can have the development of different religious creeds and so on and so forth.
In 1952, Lord Desmond Leslie, a celebrated fighter pilot of World War II, nephew of Sir Winston Churchill and scion of the oldest Irish nobility, wrote the first book about these obvious parallels between modern-day UFO sightings and descriptions in those ancient Indo-Vedic writings.
I was in a friend's library, and we were waiting. There was nothing to do, so I just suddenly saw this book. Or rather, it seemed to jump out of the shelf at me. Atlantis and Lemuria, written in 1890 by Scott Elliott, published by the Theosophists, with maps of Atlantis and descriptions, all taken from the astral, the Akashic record. And it was very exciting. The thing that interested me most was the description of their flying machines, which it said was circular and glowed in the dark and could move very quickly on this free energy. And they were called Vimanas. And that got me going. I said, now wait a minute, these sound so like these flying saucers we just heard about. Remember Captain, wasn't it Mantell, Rupert Mantell, the chap who first saw them and described them like flying saucers. So I decided I'd do a bit of research. I went to the British Museum library, especially the Oriental section, where I got out the whole of the Mahabharata. Lovely English literal translation by Pratap Chandra Roy. No florid, just straight literal. And each chapter luckily had a summary. You know, there are about 20 volumes, and I waded through and picked out everything about these Vimanas. I just couldn't believe it, that the ancients had had them, and that they'd been in contact with space people. And it said by means of these wonderful craft, the star people can visit Earth, and we can visit the stars. And then it described them in Tibet as like pearls in the sky. You couldn't have had. But then I read on, and there was things about wars in ancient India, and some of the weaponry they used, with able to make three-dimensional images of a false army. Hologram, surely. A thing called the Brahma weapon, which had the power of the universe, and a light of 1,000 suns, which Teller then quoted. You remember about the atom bomb. And it said that the survivors rushed and bathed and threw off their arms, but a few days later their hair fell out, their skin turned red, and they died of a horrible sickness. And the army was so burned, they were just like, even the elephants were shadows on the ground. Well, that was Hiroshima, surely. So I said, you know, all this has happened before, whether it was a space war or war among the Atlanteans, I don't know.
For one entire year, Lord Desmond searched in old libraries for references to ancient UFOs. Then he completed his book.
And then I got from a correspondent in America, Rick Williamson, who said a friend of his had had a contact, a landing, and taken these amazing photographs. So I wrote to him and said I'd written this book, and could I see his photos? Well, back they all came with a lovely letter giving me permission to use them. Nothing about any payment or anything like that. These astonishing pictures of Adamskis, which were quite unlike what we thought a UFO should look like. And we had them tested for atmospheric hazing and recession and all, and it came out that they were large objects quite a long way away and not little models close up. And he seemed a very nice fellow. And then he wrote a rather sad little note saying that I've written an account of this landing and want to publish it. So my then publisher, Werner Laurie, which was headed by Waveney Girvan, said, well, if you use his photos, you're going to kill his book, so what are we going to do? So we sort of looked at the ceiling and bit our nails, and Waveney said, why don't we have a joint publication, your book and then his as the second part? I said, well, that's a marvelous idea.
George Adamski, a lecturer on Tibetan philosophy in metaphysical circles, had observed and photographed dozens of UFOs at that time. On November the 20th, 1952, together with 5 witnesses, he drove into the Californian desert to watch for UFOs. After they had a sighting together, he separated from the group and saw a dome-shaped craft. A young man in brown overalls with long blonde hair came out of a ravine and approached him. They started communication in sign language. At the same time, his companions observed the encounter through binoculars and confirmed the contact later in notarized affidavits. Lord Desmond decided to investigate the George Adamski case on site.
Well, then I eventually got over to America at a time when you couldn't take any money out of England, 1953, and met this amazing man. And he lived in a little house up on Palomar Mountain with his secretary, Lucy McGuinness, and Alice Wells. They were very hospitable. Making a little money hadn't affected him. And he was an incredible fellow. You know, he would sometimes really annoy you by telling you the most absurd things which you knew weren't true. And at other times he'd come out with such profound wisdom. Are you going to be able to filter this off?
And you talked to him, you asked him?
I have, more or less on gestures and mental telepathy, as it is known talk transfer.
He does not speak. I mean,
he didn't at the time, but I have met him since, and he does speak very well English as well as in the other language.
Did he tell you where he came from?
Yes, this time he told me he was from Venus, although I have met men out of from other planets as well.
And you had to sort of dig information out of him. Now, perhaps you remember the first contact. He said he took photos, and they all were burned or didn't come out because of the UFO being so near. I asked him if he had the negatives, and he dug them out, and they were black. But I held them up against the sun, and you could see the UFO. It was there, but it needed a lot of light to see it. He hadn't spotted that. He also hadn't spotted that all the proportions of it were in perfect golden section. A lot of little details like that. Now, I asked the 2 ladies, Lucy and Alice. They said yes, they'd seen him talking to the spaceman, and they'd seen this flash as the UFO took off. And they also earlier, as he described, saw the big mothership. And that was chased away by a lot of American planes. You know, it just took off and went off.
4 years later, the U.S. Air Force project, Blue Book, officially confirmed that indeed one of their pilots chased a UFO on November the 20th, 1952 over Desert Center, California, precisely where Adamski met the spaceman.
Then the other thing that worried me was the footprint of the Venusian in the sand, because it was all sort of gravel, that desert. So he directed me so I could find the place. And I read the book, and it said the visitor kept rubbing his foot into the ground. And I did that, and under the gravel was beautiful sand, and I left a perfect imprint of my own feet. So that was true.
Later, Adamski claimed he was contacted by extraterrestrials who are living among us unrecognized. They invited him to fly with them into space. Aboard a huge cigar-shaped mothership, he had the opportunity to take a look into outer space and onto the moon. He wrote a second book about these experiences, Inside the Spaceships.
Then he described to me a thing, mind you, this was 1953-54, how he saw these fireflies in space out of the UFO window, which then, 1969, the first moon trip, you know, Glenn sees these fireflies in space, exactly like Adamski. He told me there were 3 asteroid belts. Well, I believe they found a second one somewhere beyond Neptune. And he said there's another beyond Pluto. We wait and see. And he told me how when he was on the big mothership, they had this amazing, amazing movie. I've never seen anything like it. All the images, there was no screen, and everything happened all round you. Well, that was a hologram. But you know, no one had seen a hologram. They hadn't been invented.
I believe if you read the published material, you will find the descriptions of the firefly effect that was years before John Glenn reported it in 1961. The description that there are more than 9 planets in the solar system, actually 12, and we have acknowledged 11 so far. His description of the darkness of space, quite different from what you would expect to see here from the surface of the planet, also reported by the astronauts. There are numerous accounts of what he has described from space, this atmospheric collection on the moon, and activity on the surface of the moon as far as fog, clouds, water. All these things were reported by George Adamski already in the 50s, way before we had a space program. And I believe that stands for itself. People can always criticize, but I've yet to see any substantial, tangible evidence that anybody's ever come up with.
Indeed, official NASA photographs show clouds and water on the moon, although these are impossible according to science. These photos were presented by the Danish NATO exchange officer, Major Hans C. Petersen, in a lecture in Washington, D.C. in 1995.
Whether I like it or not, I have to say that science is not telling the truth. I have in my possession pictures from the moon which, one, show smoke or vapor or something else racing from a crater. Now, to have smoke racing from a crater, you need an atmosphere. Otherwise, smoke cannot race. So, moon has an atmosphere. Some advanced scientists today agree and say that the moon have an atmosphere 65% or 64% of Earth's atmosphere. Well, then it can also hold water. In one of my pictures from the moon, which I have got from NASA, you see water on the moon in an artificial water reservoir. On the next picture, which is taken by Michael Collins on his second trip around the moon, where he photographed exactly the same area, probably because he also has seen this water reservoir. The water reservoir was gone, meaning that it was camouflaged, so that we could not prove that there was any water on the moon. On another picture from the moon, we see 2 tunnels very clearly, not just a hole in the cliffs, but a nicely square, artificial made hole into. And right in front of this tunnel, in the side, left side of the tunnel, there's a huge, thick pole or obelisk, or what you would call it, which is clearly artificial. And many, many, many other things. We see objects moving and leaving tracks behind. NASA call them stones rolling down the moon's surface, but if you look closer, investigate the picture closer, you can actually see on shadow and light that it is rolling up the moon's surface, and so on and so forth. So we know definitely that science is not telling the truth about our moon. So that the world today is actually living on one big lie about their own lives. Because the governments don't tell the truth they know about the visiting space people. We have got a wrong story about our planets, about our moon. So our science is built on wrong teachings, and so on and so forth.
But where do the space people come from? From Mars and Venus, Adamski claimed. Impossible according to science. but still, Introductory Space Sciences, a textbook of the United States Air Force Academy, claims it is possible that UFOs originate from, quote, the planets in our own solar system. It furthermore confirms that one of 4 observed groups of extraterrestrials, quote, appear to be essentially the same as Earthmen, and that contacts, quote, may have already taken place secretly. Do they have bases on our neighboring planets? We don't know. Lord Desmond Leslie has another explanation.
Now, I told him at the time, I said, but surely your Venusians were etheric people and materialize because Venus is probably very hot. And he said, they were no goddamn spooks. I said, no, nor was resurrected Christ. You know, he was fully materialized, but I'm not talking. No, he wouldn't listen to that. He didn't want to confuse the issue. I think that was it. He just didn't want to confuse. Because I'm also certain that some of his trips were taken astrally, which, as St. Paul says, is so real you can't tell the difference. St. Paul says, whether I was in the body or out of the body, I know not.
I think the most important thing I learned from George Adamski is that we on Earth are not all that unique in the universe. The universe is populated with persons like ourselves, people at various stages of development. There are billions and billions of planets, around billions and billions of suns, billions and billions of galaxies. We don't know any end to the universe. But George Adamski told me that it is reasonable to believe that there are people like ourselves on other planets. Now, if we think the conditions are inimical to human life on other planets, as for instance Venus, what do we know about higher dimensionality? So George revealed to me that there are vibrations above the vibrations that we are familiar with, the vibrations which permit tangibility, the matter of touch. I would compare it, and he compared it, as to the vibrations in light. We have a spectrum, for instance, ultraviolet on one side, infrared on the other, where the vibrations which we are familiar with in the center. There's also a spectrum of tangibility in the atom itself, and this is true all over the universe. And while we're familiar only with the vibrations which make the tangibility we're familiar with possible on Earth, he was aware that there are other invisible tangibilities and that contact may be made. This ties in with the whole religious history of angels, for instance, from other places, of demonic creatures from other places. The universe is so much more complex than we had any idea of. He revealed to me this type of a universe.
Adamski's books were published worldwide, and shortly afterwards he established a global network of friends on all continents. One of them was Major Hans Petersen of the Danish Air Force, who, after UFO observations on radar and conversations with American colleagues, became convinced that Earth is indeed visited by extraterrestrials. He organized a lecture for Adamski in Copenhagen and became convinced of the reality of his contacts.
He was planning a world trip, and he asked me to organize the Europe part of it. And at that time he came to my country. Now, at the day of his arrival, my son, Lars, and I went to the local airport to meet him. And since I knew the airport well, we went to a point where we could overlook the whole airfield. And it was rather low weather. When the aircraft came out of the clouds, we saw that the flying saucer was just 20 or 30 meters behind it. And as soon as the aircraft was fully clear and ready to land, it went back up into the clouds. When I, 10 minutes later, met George, I said, there was a flying saucer following your aircraft for landing. He said, oh, yes, the boys always follow me. And this he proved later on his trip through Europe. and we arranged a hotel for him in the outskirts at a small town which had a harbor. And we knew that nobody could disturb him because nobody would know that he would be staying there. When they came late afternoon or mid-afternoon and checked in, the receptionist said that there had been a young man calling for him. Everybody wondered, but George, he just smiled. Now he said, I would like to rest a little bit so you can come and pick me up again at 6 o'clock for this round trip. So they did. In this old-fashioned hotel, like in many other old-fashioned hotels, there were double doors to the rooms, one opening to the outside and one opening to the inside. So there's a space between the two doors. When the group came to pick up George, there was a ladder laying between the two doors. And on the front side you could read the word Adamski. So he opened the ladder, and inside was a message saying, Adamski, do not go to Finland this time. Trouble for you, and signed with 6 words. He phoned me and said, I don't feel well of going to Finland because I got this warning. And I persuaded him to wait because it could be somebody who trying to make some fun out of it. Next morning early he called me again and he said, I met a spaceman this morning, a man from Venus, and he handed me a small parcel which he asked me to develop to the Pope in Rome. So I will definitely not go to Finland, and I'll also not go to Germany. So please make arrangements. And I did. Meanwhile, our group in Copenhagen was a bit skeptical that a spaceman had been around in their environment. So they went to the harbor where there was an old fisherman who used to fish very early in the morning, and they found him and asked him if he had been fishing this morning, and he said yes, he had. And they asked him if anything special had happened, if he had talked to anybody, something like that. He said no. Oh yes, he said, I talked to a funny American guy, but then there was a young man calling for him, so he left and I saw they were talking together.
He came to London. He'd been to Rome lecturing, and he'd been on a European lecture tour where he met the Queen of Holland, and there was a frightful row and the students tried to disrupt it. And his lectures were run by Lou Zünstark, the niece of Carl Jung, lovely lady, with Tim Good, you know, who's written a lot of very serious books. Well, after his Roman visit, he just stayed with us for a few days to relax, and I kept the press away, and we took our little boat out on the Thames, and while we were there, he brought out some money, and among it was what looked like a little gold coin. And he just casually said, that's a bit of gold no one's ever going to get off me. I said, why, it's very nice. He said, look at it. It was a little medal of Pope John, who at that time was dying, John the 23rd. And he said, I saw him in Rome. He gave me this. I said, George, please. Nobody sees the Pope. He's dying. Tell me you've bicycled round the rings of Saturn. I'll probably believe you. But I don't think you saw the Pope. He said, well, I did. And he gave me this. And I gave him a sealed packet from the space people. He sat up in bed, and I gave him this package. He said, oh, that's what I've been waiting and praying for. I said, what was in the package? He said, I don't know. The space people gave it to me. It was sealed. I wasn't going to ask questions. But he said, that man isn't going to die. He looks so fit and well. And then the next day, I think it was a Sunday, the news came, the Pope was dead. And George said, the bastards, they've murdered him. Well, they hadn't, because this is another interesting bit of evidence. Years later, the Pope's doctor told the story of Pope John's last days, how he had this form of cancer where in the last few days you have a false reprieve, and you suddenly look very young and well, and you feel marvellous, and then, boom. Well, that's when George saw him. But nobody knew that for many years. So then I said to Lou Zinstag, who was tell me, Lou, what really happened? He didn't see Pope John. She said, well, all I know is we went to the Vatican, we went to the St. Peter's Square at George's insistence, and he suddenly said, that's my man. And there was a priest with red here. I said, well, that's probably a bishop or Monsignor, somebody rather important. And he said they embraced like old friends, and they went off through the private entrance on the left, not the public. And I said, well, that's amazing. Then what? And she said, well, an hour later, he came out jumping up and down like a schoolboy, saying, hooray, I've seen him, I've seen the Pope, I gave him the best. And Zeus said, if that man was an actor, he's the best actor I've ever seen. I've never seen anyone so radiantly happy. Now, interesting thing, he was with us several days before he mentioned it. You know, if it was a load of bull, he'd have probably said, look what the Pope gave me, I've seen the Pope, here's a medal. Yeah, not at all, he kept rather quiet about it. It just sort of came out. So I thought, well, I'm going to do one more test. I was at school with Basil Hume, now Cardinal Hume, in the same dormitory, and I even put Eno's fruit salts in his pot one night, and it fizzled when he peed. Anyway, we were good friends. And I asked him, I said, listen, Basil, this little gold medal of Pope John the 23rd, where can you buy it? Can you? Oh, no, not at all. You can't buy those, only the Pope will give you those. I told him Adamski had got one. He said, well, he must have done something very special to get one of those. And you know, Papa Pacelli, Pius XII, had a contact in the Vatican Gardens. He said he met two angels, well, okay, Venusians, and they told him there was a wonderful future ahead for our world.
George Adamski's meetings with the Pope and the Queen of Holland were not his only encounters with the mighty ones of this earth.
He visited the United Nations several times. Once I know for sure he was invited by U Thant, the General Secretary at that time, and he spent a full day in the United Nations, and as he said afterwards, I stayed there for one full day and I talked to a lot of people.
George Adamski told me that he was able to enter any department of the government in Washington, and he showed me his ordnance pass, which enabled him to do this. I was very familiar with this type of a pass because I had worked for the United States Ordnance Department between the graduate work at the University of Rochester in the physics department and my work at Eastman Kodak Company. George was very good at keeping a secret. It was part of his integrity to be able to do so. He did this on both sides. If he had been told by the government not to speak about a thing, he did not. If he had been told by a spaceman not to speak about a thing, he did not. It was not easy. He said it this way, my heart is a graveyard of secrets.
At another time, this will be to go too far to tell details about it, but he left Earth for some days for another planet. I was informed beforehand that he would leave the planet, and he called me right away after he came back and told me that he had to go to Washington on his arrival because he had a message to the president. But he said, I cannot tell you what this message is, but if you follow the political situation on Earth, you will, for yourself, be able to see what the message contains. In 1 year, you will see the result. And 1 year later, we had the Cuban crisis. And if you put your hand on your heart and tell the truth, you will probably know and acknowledge that if President Kennedy had not solved the Cuba crisis just the way he did, we would have had the Third World War.
For in the final analysis, our most basic common link is that we all inhabit this small planet. We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's futures. And we are all mortal.
This is just a few details out of, you could say, hundreds of things which you could tell, which all together fits into the picture that this man was something special, that he was telling the truth, and that those who were in power all over the world knew that he was telling the truth.
Why are they still not telling the public about the existence of UFOs and extraterrestrials?
Why is the government, why are they all so paranoid about these? Because it's free energy. End of the oil monopoly, aviation as we know it, the automotive industry. For something much better, but, you know, they won't get their greedy little hands on it. So they'll go to any lengths. When the oil runs out, they'll probably pretend they've discovered it and release it.
We have a great deal to lose, both politically and economically, by the type of acknowledging that the fact that they're here. They propulse their craft by electromagnetic energy. This is free energy. It radiates from every planetary body, and it costs nothing. Free energy, you wouldn't have to pay your light bills, gasoline for your cars, any of this, etc., etc. And we as a society, we as a world, function on the consumption of petroleum. We literally, if we stopped using petroleum, the whole world economic system would cease to exist. The type of chaos that would result, the people who control the power have no intention of letting that go. That's one of the reasons. There's also religious reasons as well, because some religions teach that there's nothing up there. And when they have to start acknowledging the fact that life is a universal manifestation, then we have to rethink some of the statements we have. And we're very rigid in our minds. We don't want to acknowledge anything different or change. I think you can see that in the political climate here in the United States today.
Glenn Steckling, a U.S. airline pilot, controls the heritage of the UFO contactee today. The son of German immigrants, became a witness of UFO sightings and encounters in his childhood, as did many others in Adamski's vicinity.
My experiences with George Adamski began in 1963 when my parents and I met him and later spent time with him both in Madeline Rotifer's house in Silver Springs, Maryland, and also he spent time with us in our house in Alexandria, Virginia. That was due to an experience that we had in Washington where we sighted a dome-shaped, bell-shaped craft, and due to that sighting, we got in contact with Mr. Adamski and then met him and subsequently spent the last 2 years of his life, whenever he was on the East Coast, together with him. I spent a number of times with G.A. George Adamski in Madeline's house when my parents and Mrs. Rotifer would go out and arrange lecture tours and engagements in the Washington area. And so I have very vivid memories of Mr. Adamski and the sightings that we've had out at Silver Springs. Many others besides the Rotifer film, which was taken a month before his death. And the type of people he was associated with, yes.
When we moved to Denver, Colorado, we contacted Mr. Adamski after having read the book Inside the Spaceship and asked him, we were about to move to Washington, D.C., and if he would come and lecture in the area because Fred would very much like to have him there. He immediately wrote us back and he said, funny, there's a lady in Washington, D.C. who asked me the same thing, so please get in contact with her. And so this is how we became friends with Mrs. Madeline Rotifer, and with her we experienced with Mr. Adamski many, many privilege, many different experiences, such as seeing the Scout Cups, such as seeing, I can't even tell you how many Scout Cups or Space Cups we had seen over the years, because I don't think anybody would believe that. And then he went out to see that there was a Scout Cup very close to his window, because the very same thing happened to my husband and me some several years ago, shortly before he passed away. And we were sitting in the living room in the evening, and a feeling of great love came over us. Not a personal love, not an emotional love, a universal love. And with it came, the whole living room was lit up. And so we decided to go and take a look. And as we went outside, there was this beautiful Scout Cup hanging a few feet over the floor. You could see inside the porthole. It was the most fantastic sight. And this feeling stood with us, I would say, for many, many weeks.
The most spectacular incident took place on February 26, 1965, when a lady from this circle, U.S. government employee Madeline Rotifer, participated in a contact and was present when Adamski filmed an alien spaceship with her own camera at close range.
We met him in March of 1964. I arranged a lecture at the Civic Center, about 10 miles away at Rockville. And we became friends. I knew him only 1 year and 1 month, the last year of his life. And he visited from California here about 5 times in that last year of his life, just intermittent. He didn't stay at this house all that time. But on February 26th, approximately 8 o'clock in the morning, a space friend, contact of Mr. Adamski, came to this house. I was still asleep, but when I got up, Mr. Adamski told me that he had been told that we should get cameras ready for filming later in the day. And of course I had never seen one so close before, or I didn't expect that they were going to come hovering that close in my yard. I would have rented a Polaroid or prepared with more cameras, but Mr. Adamski actually helped me put film in the little 8mm Bell and Howell movie camera. And he had film in his Kodak camera too. And we waited. Now they did not tell him what time they were coming, but this was earlier in the morning, but this was middle of the afternoon, about 3:30, when we noticed them at a distance. And we were at the dining room window looking out, and they came in closer. And by the way, 3 more spacemen came and knocked at the door just before the incident. And Mr. Adamski went, and they told him they said, "Get your cameras ready, they're coming." Now that is how close he was associated with those people from other planets. And it's difficult to believe, but they looked just like American. One of them had brown hair, and one had dark hair, and one had slightly gray hair. And they parked in a car. I believe it was an Oldsmobile, but I don't know the year, down here at the street when they came. And then the spaceship came, and we went outside. But I had a broken leg. I had fallen the month before in my living room, and I was in a walking cast. And but I was able to walk around, but with a little limping difficulties, but I did get around. And but when we came out on the porch up here and started to film, he told me to film, and he was going to film. I said, "George, I can't do this. I'm too wobbly." And I had not had the camera but 2 months. My husband had given it to me for Christmas just 2 months before. So I handed him, he said, "Okay, I'll do it." So I gave him my camera, and he laid his down, and we filmed it he filmed it then. I started, but I wasn't sure of myself, and I didn't want to miss it. So I gave the camera to him, and he finished filming it. But I was, clumping around in the background, and and able to walk, of course, without too much difficulty with his cast on. But they only stayed about approximately 10 minutes. They did not land. They did not get out of the spacecraft, but there were glimpses of people through the round windows. And they maneuvered, they came in here. It was a low humming and a low swishing sound. And they came in, when they got close here, they came in very slowly. And it was round, and there were 3 of these, well, about this size, I guess, these landing gears underneath, and they were going like this, retracting in and out. And they told George later it was for stabilization. If they'd put all of them out, they would have had to land. And they kept one retracted all the time, and the other 2 were going in and out. But anyway, low swishing, low humming sound. And it wasn't real loud, but there was definitely a motor sound accompanied with it. And it was a brilliant royal, between a royal and a purple blue in color. It was a beautiful blue, and deeper blue than this. And it was round, and as it moved, it looked crooked, and on the film it shows this slight distortion, and it looked, lopsided and so on. But they were moving and putting on this performance for Mr. Adamski to back up, his efforts to get the world leaders to tell the truth about the visitors from other planets. They were demonstrating, they wanted him to capture this on film, their abilities to do certain maneuvers. And they wanted him to have this proof to show the people of the world, because our world governments have better film and they haven't shared any of them with us. And they wanted Mr. Adamski to have this piece of film to show, to the audiences when he was speaking, how they do these certain maneuvers. They did this on purpose.
William Sherwood, an optical physicist of Eastman Kodak, known as the father of photoelectric testing used in the optical industry ever since, analyzed the rotifer film in the Eastman Kodak laboratories in Rochester, New York.
I analyzed the film frame by frame. There were 182 frames. We made enlargements of the frames. We looked for such things as double exposure, all the telltale things that you find when there's trick photography. We found out all we could about the circumstances under which the pictures were made, the distance from the camera to the object, the size of the image. We didn't know the size of the object, but we derived the size of the object from a knowledge of the size of the image, the focal length of the camera, and the distance at which it was photographed. I could tell by the branch of the tree where the object hovered just where it was photographed. I went to Madeline's house. I paced off the distance. I knew exactly what the parameters were. I derived a value of 27 feet for the size of the object. I remember just how well this formula worked out. It's a triangular formula. The focal length of the camera was 9 millimeters. The distance was 90 feet. The size of the image was 2.7 millimeters. Therefore, the size of the object had to be 27 feet. You'll find this in Timothy Good's book. There were other factors. We brought them all to bear. There were instruments we used, which we had available in the laboratories at Eastman Kodak Company. These included densitometers, photometers, projection devices of all sorts, electronic devices, everything that you could name that you could use, telephotometers, and so on. The electron microscope, I believe, was used by a man at Kodak Park. Everything pointed to the conclusion that the objects in the film were true objects, unknown objects, not model objects, and that it was taken by Madeline exactly as she told us it was. People with experience, to call upon the experience of those who had concentrated on the photographic film and reproducing pictures, meant more than anything else. It is not just my opinion. It's the opinion of all of the experts.
One of these experts was Colonel Coleman von Kivitsky, founder of the audiovisual division of the Royal Hungarian General Staff, who worked as a film expert for the United Nations during the 1960s.
Medellin Rodefer short 8mm sequence filmed on a flying object in front of her house above the trees are genuine. I was personally on the location and I verified the distance where the UFOs were flying and all the necessary environmental circumstances which excluded any kind of faking this movie film sequence. Madeline Rodefer was a medical secretary or a nurse at the United States Government Air Force. Madeline Rodefer presented a movie film at the Air Force. I think so, that was the Project Blue Book. When that would be fake, I don't believe that an employee of the government would show a fake movie film to the really high authorities of the United States Air Force and the Project Blue Book, where are real professional people, an expert on the motion picture film and especially on the amateur film.
Bob Oechsler, a robotics engineer and former mission specialist of the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, Maryland, is also convinced of the Rodefer film's authenticity. He believes the flight pattern indicates an energy field which enables the disk to maneuver independently of terrestrial gravitation.
The individual images as they came up clearly showed something that you could not see with the naked eye in looking at the film or even looking at the individual prints under close scrutiny, and that there was a haze, if you will, a very tight haze, almost like a fuzzy outline around the craft itself on the image. Now, this, of course, compared to the trees that are visible in the film, which were crystal clear and very well in focus. In other words, you have a very sharp contrast. You immediately might be concerned about the possibility of capabilities of double exposure, which is, of course, very difficult to do with film. However, in this particular case, we found it very, very intriguing that the craft itself had very, very sharp contrasting edges along where the porthole areas are and around the top of the cab. But especially in the bottom portion of the craft, we began to see that there was light emitting from the craft, but this was not a light such as a glow, like a reflection you'd get if somebody was projecting a light onto an object. This was rather interesting because it tended to suggest that there was some form of energy associated with the vehicle itself that was actually causing this sort of a red glow in the undercarriage area. But that, along with the glow that we were getting, the sort of a haze, a very, very distinct fine haze around and very, very close to the craft itself through the images, suggested that there was an actual radiation effect. Almost, I guess you could liken it to a mirage effect. People are fairly familiar with when you ride down the highway during the summer and you look across and you can see the heat rising, and it tends to distort images that were behind the mirage. Well, this is very similar to the effect that we saw on this object, suggesting several things. One, that you were actually looking at a three-dimensional object as something that was superimposed onto the film. That, again, suggested credibility with regard to the film. And secondly, it suggested that there was technology associated with it. This was not just, a trash can lid or something that was just casually thrown up in the air while filming was going on. So began to become much more encouraged with what I was seeing. The more I began to look into the individual segments, the film itself, the motion, we began to see things that you might liken to a distortion. In other words, the craft itself physically changed shape. Now, not the whole craft, but it seemed that portions of the craft changed shape. Now, this was a product either of what you might call an optical illusion as a result of the technology associated with the craft, the method that it used to maintain its levitated state to violate gravity, or it was a mechanical apparatus associated with the craft itself. We noticed that the ball structure in the bottom of the craft, in concert with the receding of these individual structures, that the one portion of the craft had an indentation that would go in every time this one ball would go up, and then it would come back out into a round disc, or circular area. So I think that these features all collectively, more than anything else, and even more than the testimony of Madeline wrote it for herself, and the historical testimony of George Adamski prior to his death regarding this particular event, all tend to suggest that we are probably dealing with an authentic case. And I think it's time that perhaps some researchers of historical value would probably want to go back and take a much closer look at the George Adamski case in its entirety.
There were many attempts to discredit him, all of which I feel have successfully failed. First of all, they tried to debunk his pictures and cannot do so successfully. They've claimed they were water coolers, and that was proven wrong. They tried to say they were models, that was proven wrong. They've been orthographically projected, biometrically, radiation tests. Now they started to go through computer testing. Adamski's photographs have gone through more tests in the last 50 years than any other photograph out there, and have stood the test of time. And I wonder if the rest of the pictures could sustain such the same test as his have.
But why do you think...
But why do they still question the reality of his experiences?
Discrediting him and his message.
Adamski stood for things which are not so popular in today's UFO movement. First of all, he did not believe in psychism or mysticism in this field. He felt that that belonged in a different field that had nothing to do with UFOs, because these people come from worlds where they believe in the meaning and essence of life. They don't believe that something else, whether it's the stars, whether it's a future, or anybody else is responsible for their actions. They are responsible for their actions. And so this type of information is what people tend to attack on Adamski. And he was not attacked by the officials as vehemently as he is by the rest of the people in the UFO field, because they feel threatened by the type of information he gave them.
In September 1967, Steckling himself had a spectacular UFO sighting.
In 1967, my father, mother, and I were on lecture tour in Germany, and we were traveling from Mannheim on the train, and we witnessed, along with the passengers on board this train, a armada of what we would call spacecraft or UFOs appearing and disappearing above the train, I'd say around 10,000 feet. And my father, with his 8mm camera, filmed the sequence of these craft. And as the film rolls, you can see the crafts appear and disappear in formation, and you can see the motion of the trees moving by as the train is in motion, so the craft are behind the trees, not in front of it. And it's quite an interesting piece of film. It was reported in the newspaper the next day, the German newspaper for that particular area.
On our way back from Schifferstadt to Frankfurt, we were able to film a whole armada of spacecraft flying over, I would say, very close to and very near to the Frankfurt airport. This film and all of Mr. Adamski's film we took as we returned to Washington, D.C., and my husband wrote letters to NASA, to the Pentagon, and offered them the chance to look upon the films that were available. We got invited to all of the organization, to the Pentagon. We got invited to NASA. And during the conversation that we held with NASA, we had 22 scientists present. And none of these scientists ridiculed what we had. In fact, they weren't even interested in the Scoutcast because they told us the size of it, how they fly, and with what they fly.
These are some of the films George Adamski took by himself. He shot this one in Mexico. A cigar-shaped craft hovers over the street. Adamski took this film through the portal of a spaceship. It shows a white disk in Earth orbit. In another film from Mexico, a luminous telemeter disk moves in front of a bush. Behind the bushes, we recognize the dome of a landed scout ship.
That he was telling the truth was very easy for me because I got confirmation through sightings I had on my own. George had a lot of sightings, and he told us how small reconnaissance objects, not bigger than a tennis ball, looked. He told us that there were some even larger. He told us there was reconnaissance object with a crew, normally 3 normal-looking people and 2 robots. He told us there was big motherships who carried the flying saucers into the atmosphere before they released them. He told us about objects, underwater objects which could fly in space or dive. And he told us that they could dive into the water without any sign of disturbances on the water. Even if the water was completely still, it was diving just like on a trick film in a movie with behind a mirror or something like that. And over the years, I had many sightings where I saw these small reconnaissance objects. I saw the object with a crew. I saw a mothership, and I saw 2 landings and so on. And nothing of what I experienced was outside what George Adamski had told us. So to me, there was no problem. I had the proof that he was telling the truth.
Adamski-type spaceships were observed and photographed all over the world. They have appeared over Japan and Mexico, South America and England, and in many other countries. In August of 1991, one witness was able to film a landed dome-shaped craft near Carp in Ontario, Canada. The small reconnaissance probes were photographed in Denmark and the U.S. from close range. In the south of England, Stephen Alexander filmed a telemeter ball flying over a cornfield in 1990. This spectacular footage was shot in June 1973 during one of the first flights of the Concorde. The luminous small object surrounds the supersonic plane and hovers for seconds in front of its engines. Cigar-shaped motherships were seen in similar frequency. This film was taken over Rhode Island in 1967. This photo was taken over Texas in the same year, or over Lake Onega in Russia in 1978. These films were shot in 1980 over Hagen in the Ruhr area of Germany. This official film of the Russian Space Agency was taken in June of 1992 by cosmonauts of the Mir space station. An identical object was photographed in June 1966 by U.S. astronaut McDivitt aboard Gemini 4. Hundreds of witnesses saw this cigar-shaped craft in April 1990 over Krasnodar in Russia. This film was taken in July 1995 in Mexico near the Popocatépetl volcano. And this cigar-shaped craft was filmed by Tim Edwards of Salinas, Colorado in September 1995. Experts who analyzed the footage came to the conclusion that the object is more than half a mile long. The mothership is surrounded by small, luminous craft. Another case from the year 1954 was even investigated by the British royal family.
About 2 years after Adamski, a UFO like his landed up in the Lake District, Cumberland, Lancashire, so up there on the side of Lake Coniston. And two small boys, Stephen Derbyshire and his cousin, took a little photograph, 2 photos of it. And in the second photo it was moving and it was distorted, just the way, you know, a golf club appears to be curved. They used to think it was bent. It wasn't. It's the movement of the film. And we compared them on orthographic projection to Adamski's, and they matched perfectly. So Prince Philip actually wanted to see them, and they were sent. I arranged it through the Queen's Secretary, Sir Boy Browning, who was a very nice man, and husband of Daphne du Maurier, who wrote Rebecca, and a great war hero. And they were taken, but the deal was no press, no inkling. And the press begged me. They even said, look, just nod and we'll give you £1,000. Well, I mean, today I suppose some arsehole would have sold the whole story, but, you know, in those days a deal was a deal. So they met him and they told their story.
Finally, Lord Desmond encountered a spaceman by himself when Adamski visited England.
He was going to lecture in Bath, and again he was staying with us. This was an earlier visit, not the one with the Pope, it was earlier. So I took him to Paddington Station, and the sequence of events is quite interesting. It was a very grey, dull, dark day, okay? A porter took his bags. I said, get this gentleman a first-class seat. Yes, sir. So we went. So the porter chose the seat, not us. We went into this first-class carriage, with one other man sitting in it, with this marvellous silver-gold hair, beautiful blue suit, and dark Polaroids. Why wear dark Polaroids, you know, on such a dark day? Apparently they don't like our light. And he radiated, I don't know what, he just had such an aura that I was almost knocked over. And he then took off his glasses and smiled at us as much as say, hello, I brought you here. I hadn't been very well, unfortunately, and I was so sort of dismayed by this that I went out in the corridor and said, George, come here. What do you think about that chap? He said, I don't know. I said, well, I think he could be. I mean, there's something very odd about him. This orange skin, dark glasses. Anyway, I'm just making it up. So then the whistle blew and the train went. Well, I wish I'd stayed aboard, because they'd no sooner got talking than he revealed himself at the secret handshake. And he said he was working as a scientist in England, pretending to be one.
At that time is 1963, when he was here, he had told us that there were quite some living in Europe, and he said there were 15 living in the Scandinavian area. And some stayed for a longer time, some stayed for shorter times. They came and they went and so on and so forth. Now, in the later years, we have found out that they are rather active in the Swedish area. And 2 days ago I had a lecture in a society inside the United Nations called SEAT. And a week before I left, the space people working in Sweden sent me a elementary message to give to the United Nations and to the world leaders via one of the contactees in Sweden. So they are around, they are active, but in many, many cases people don't know that they are there because, as I said before, they look just like we do. They fit into our society, they even work in our society.
They are interested in and concerned in our development as a race, as a society, and the type of behaviors that we display, what we are doing to our planet, the destruction of the only place we have right now. We're not unlike they can go to different places. They're very concerned with that, and they bring a message of peace and understanding, purpose of life. It has nothing to do with fear, it has nothing to do with manipulation of the mind, nor the taking over of the world and this planet. I can assure you they have societies and much better places to live. They certainly wouldn't need this place. They've been coming amongst us for thousands of years, and we as a civilization are not very receptive to peaceful ideas. We tend to be very aggressive, whether we burn people at the stakes, or whether we discredit them for their ideas, or blatantly shoot and execute people. I would be very hesitant. I would be very cautious coming to this world because we're not very stable. And so they have decided to walk amongst us more in a Peace Corps type of situation and then help individuals or individual bodies with the type of information they bring.
On April the 23rd, 1965, George Adamski passed away after a heart attack. He was buried in the Arlington National Cemetery in Washington, D.C., close to the grave of President John F. Kennedy. But in the hearts of his friends and followers, he is unforgotten to this day. They are convinced he was not just an ordinary person, but a man with a mission.
The last thing he showed me, before he left, and that was the last time I saw him, he pulled up his thing and showed me his navel. He didn't have one. He had a starburst incised in his belly, the depth of my finger, cut into the flesh, deep, deep, deep channels. I said, how the hell did you get that? He said, I don't know, I was born with it, I've always had it. I said, well, who are you, George? He said, well, I don't know, but you see, I cannot remember anything before I was 4 years old, when my parents, who were Polish immigrants, came to America. And they told me, while they were waiting on the docks for the ship, with a little boy, 4, George Adamski, a mysterious man just came up and took him away. A few minutes later brought him back again, but he was a different child.
George was a person who was always receptive to this type of thought and the type of message that they brought. He already spoke of it in the 30s. He had a number of sightings already before the telescopic shots that he took in the late 40s. And why not George? You can say that of anyone. Why him and not the next one? And then why not the next one and not him? It was him, and I'm sure that they examined him by looking at his thinking and his reactions, and if he would be a good person to bring this forward.
He was genuine. You could feel truth and genuine friendship. He was friendly, and he was not an actor of any kind, he just wasn't. He was sincere and honest, and you could feel the honesty and the warmth from him. And he was enthusiastic and very happy about this film, because this would help to silence some of the critics. And he was very happy about the film, and he definitely and he had a sense of humor. He definitely had a sense of humor. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to withstood all that barrage of questions from some people for hours and hours on end, and sometimes they got a little argumentative too. But he definitely said, no, none of this. He said, I'm telling you the facts, and I'm sharing them with you, and he says it's up to you to believe it or not, but he said it is important that the people of Earth know that these people are here, and they've been coming for hundreds and thousands of years, but now, because we're about to go into space, that's what they told him, and also that we're having difficulty with atmosphere here on Earth because of pollution that would continually get worse. And remember, this was 1965, and it has occurred too. We have many problems, as you all know, with thick and thicker pollution.
George Adamski was not the only contactee. Shortly after he went public, others followed and claimed that they had similar experiences. Some of them were charlatans and cultists who spread messages of salvation and tried to deceive the gullible with cheap fake films or discredited the true contactees. But others had genuine experiences. American rocket technician Daniel Fry claimed he witnessed a UFO landing near the White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. He was invited aboard and received a message for mankind.
The most significant experience that I had is probably the finding out of the major purpose for this invasion, so to speak, was to keep this planet alive, that we're approaching an area of controversy which could result in the displacement of all humanity, because we had learned how to do that without learning how to get along with each other.
Later, Fry shot some films of unknown flying objects. Contactees and UFO enthusiasts met regularly at the giant rock in the Californian desert, at the site where contactee George Van Tassel claimed to have met space people, and where he later built, allegedly under their instruction, the Integraton, a generator to reactivate human cells and to charge them with cosmic energy, as claimed by Van Tassel. One of the early contactees who spoke regularly on the giant rock conventions was Howard Menger. Menger presented what many UFO enthusiasts had long waited for: physical evidence and a message of deepness and beauty.
I was inspired by a trip to New York State in the Catskills. I was on my way up there under some kind of control. It seemed almost like the wheel was moving by itself. I know it sounds strange, but it's true. And I reached an old cabin in the woods, and inside there were what I considered to be aliens. They were not from this world, as far as I could see. They're very angelic people. And they had all kinds of instruments in the cabin, all types of electronic, like what we'd call pianos and organs. And on the wall, they had a 1-inch thick 2x2 television screen. And they could move it anywhere they wanted to. I think we're getting that nowadays. We're getting into that now, 35, 40 years later. But I went in there and they showed me the instruments, the musical instruments, and I expressed the wish that I wished I could play the piano. And they said, well, maybe we can help you. I don't know what they did, but I could sit down after that visit to the cabin, after meeting these wonderful people, and I could play anything by ear. I think it all began when I was very young, approximately 10 years old, in the early 30s, when I went up into the woods, as I often did, and saw a beautiful lady on a rock with a stream going by. And I was really surprised, because first I thought it was one of the farm people, because there were farms nearby. But this woman wasn't dressed in a farm outfit. She was dressed in beautiful, flowing gown. And she had long blonde hair and gold-colored eyes. And she seemed to be waiting for me, as though she knew I'd be there. And when she spoke in perfect English and a beautiful voice. And I was only 10 years old, but I want to tell you, this was quite an experience. She was like an angel, like talking to an angel. And she seemed to know all about me. And she mentioned some things that would happen in the near future. She departed almost like a vision, just disappeared. And I went back home. I didn't talk about it for weeks, not even to my brother, who often went up in the woods with me. We saw discs in the sky, my brother and I, during that period, that same period. And as time went on, some of the things that she had predicted were coming true. They continued from the girl on the rock right on up to the very significant ones in 1956, when the craft came in, these huge 40 to 50 foot craft, and they carried these beautiful angelic aliens. And of course, at first I wasn't ready for any of this. No cameras, no recording equipment, no witnesses. But after that, I prepared myself with cameras, witnesses. I had witnesses. I was taking a movie on one incident in 1956 in Highbridge, New Jersey, where a craft was coming in. It's in my new book, the Highbridge incident. The pictures are in there. And the craft is coming in, and I'm taking a colored movie, 8mm movie of this. I have several witnesses from the local area, and also a federal agent from the Bureau in Newark, New Jersey, was standing right next to me. I was filming a craft coming in. The door opens when it landed, and two men got out. One went to the left, one went to the right, and then a beautiful lady got out. But she had a type of spacesuit on. And she walked toward me, and when she got about 25 or 30 feet from me, she didn't say a word. And she touched something shiny on her belt. And that shiny thing got bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally enveloped her whole body to where I could see her body as a light form. And then it disappeared. And I was really surprised. I yelled back at the craft. I said, "Where did she go? Where is she?" And they yelled back in perfect Oxford English, "She's here with us in the ship." So evidently their technology has taken them into some type of teleportation, which we haven't approached that yet. Our scientists have not approached that yet, that I know of. And so evidently they have mastered time, motion, and energy in some way. Shortly after that, the two men went in the craft, the door closed, and it silently rose and left the area. I only have parts of it and slides I made from the original. The Federal Bureau of Investigation, the Bureau out of Newark, New Jersey, took the original film. As you know, there is a definite government cover-up for three reasons: political, religious, and scientific, and for national security.
Indeed, Menger had hundreds of eyewitnesses at that time. Psychiatrist Dr. Berthold Schwartz spoke with about 40 of them and became convinced that Menger's contacts were real experiences.
Well, living in northern New Jersey, where I practiced medicine for many years, I used to hear years ago on the radio Howard Menger on the Long John Neville show. And I was quite interested, to put it mildly. How could someone make these statements and make all these claims and these other things going on. Then, of course, reading about it in the papers. And my patients would ask questions, people across the board, straight Americans. So one thing led to another. And then by fortuitous luck or whatever, coincidence, I met different people that were closely associated with Howard. Leading citizens, not just average Joes, good, solid Americans. And they had quite a story to tell me. So the ball of yarn started to unroll, and I became more and more involved in who this man is, where he's coming from, how do you explain these things. One man himself was quite a well-known inventor. He knew Howard's family. Another one was being reporter for the highest circulation paper in northern New Jersey, who happened to be a classmate of my roommate at Dartmouth College years ago. So I had a contact there. The fellow opened up. He did a whole series of stories, and he said, I don't know this thing, but Howard is truthful. He's telling it as it is. The story never changes. It's the same way. And in that town of Washington, New Jersey, I interviewed this high school principal. At that time, I interviewed a blind lady, but a very refined woman of some note locally. And she told me quite a story with another teacher and a physician. Oh, gosh, you name it. Another fellow lived in the south part where they have all the hunting, and he kept on the moon potatoes that Howard had, so-called, the specimen he picked up wherever he was, out in space, who knows. But these people swore by him. They told some extraordinary stories.
What did those eyewitnesses see? What did they describe?
Well, I remember once, of course, the craft or whatever they are, the lights in the sky and the landings in the field, the great sociological, psychosocial significance of thousands of people present. And again, through synchronicity or luck, I had this patient whose father happened to be in the state police of New Jersey, so they wouldn't, as a physician, they're usually most courteous to me, occupationally perhaps. I went in and they opened the door and they said, we cannot explain this, we do not understand it, but yes, this is on the level, these strange things happen. And matter of fact, you couldn't shut them up, they had to go on and on. So, quite a story.
There were people that said they saw lights in the sky and things that darted very fast that didn't look like a helicopter or a plane because it moved too swiftly. And I remember we all came down to look at the field where the flying saucer had landed, where he said it had landed. And it was round, like burnt mark on the ground where the grass had all been singed.
And in the 1950s, a young high school boy came to me and said this man was taking them up in the wood and showing them lights that glowed. And he told them the lights came from flying saucers, from men who were landing regularly in a place called High Bridge, New Jersey. It's about 10 miles from here, from Washington, where we are now. And I knew this young boy, and I prevailed upon him to tell me more about it. I was interested as a newspaper man, and he told me who the man was, and it was Howard Menger. At that time, Howard Menger was a sign painter in a sign painting shop just about 2 blocks from this house, up around the corner. And I knew Howard, knew his wife, knew his children, knew his family, and as a reporter, I thought I had to find out more about this. So I got a hold of a couple of friends of mine from the state police, and we went to visit Howard, and he said, oh yeah, they're up there, and he showed us some photographs he had made of flying saucers, and he asked us if we would like to meet these people from outer space, and of course we said yes. So he took us up to a field up on top of the mountain and said they'd be there about 11 o'clock at night, and we just had to wait. And needless to say, we waited and waited, and nobody ever showed up. Howard later told me, he said, one of those guys that was with you was carrying a gun. He said, Howard, all those guys were carrying guns. They're all state policemen.
one evening, he advised me that there would be a sighting he believed, so I took a girl I was dating at the time, whose name was Dorothy, and a friend who worked for my father. His name was Richard Barry, and he was repairing televisions for my father. He was a student, I think, of Princeton at the time. I couldn't drive. I didn't have a license at the time. So Richard drove Dorothy and myself down there, and we met at Howard's house, sat in his kitchen, had cocoa, as I recall, and he said, let's go up into the woods and we'll see if... He said, I think the ships are here. So we did. And it was Howard, his wife Rose, his sister-in-law Mary, who I think was single at the time, myself, Dorothy, and Mr. Barry. So, and we broke up into groups. Howard and two of the women went one way, and myself and Mr. Barry and Dorothy went another way. And we walked down this wood trail, and we did see these pulsating lights in a ravine on the ground, and these were believed to be he said they were scout ships. And they seemed to be translucent. Like you could see through them, and they seemed to have brighter cores inside, like a light bulb would do, or a vacuum tube would do. And they would change colors. They'd be pink, and then they'd be green, and then they'd be white, and whatever. And they just kind of seemed to hover over the ground. One of them did seem to put out a little light, which kind of went round us, I think, and then went back in again. And we were awestruck. There's no doubt about that. I remember I'm 16 years old and never saw anything like this in my life, and quite believed everything that we saw was in fact out of this world. So we went back down to his house, and he said, I think one of the alien people trust this group, and they're going to make themselves visible. So we went out and stood in his backyard and in a lawn area, and it goes up to a hillside. It was in meadows, and within a short period of time, Howard says, look, here comes one now. And there was this kind of ghosty apparition of a human figure which kind of floated across the meadow. I remember he kind of went over a fence, kind of just floated over a barbed wire fence, and came near to us, but not that near that you could distinguish any features. I'm talking maybe several hundred feet. And then he faded away back into the woodland. And that was it. And we went back to the house, and we were just like, whoa. Greatest thing that ever was.
Another incident I recall vividly, Augie Roberts, the photographer who was documented so much of this from the early days forward, was once at Howard's house, where Howard was, just after a whole series of exciting events out in the field with the craft landing, whatever the thing was. And Howard was alone in the house. Augie knew that. And yet Howard was carrying on a conversation with another voice. Now, unless Howard is the world's greatest ventriloquist, which to my knowledge he isn't, Augie said, what is going on here?
One of the curious who wanted to see firsthand what was behind Menger's contacts was the young journalist Constance Michels. She was so fascinated by the young contactee that she fell in love and married Howard Menger in 1958. Shortly after that, she had her own first UFO encounter.
I have never seen a landed disc, but one evening shortly after we were married, we were coming home from grocery shopping, and as we came up on the hill on the farm, we parked the car against the fence, and there was a big luminous pearl-like spherical shape right above the trees over the next field. And Howard stopped. He said, look. And I said, oh, wait, I've got to get my camera. And by the time I got to the station wagon, turn around and get the camera, it was gone. That was one of the times. When we were on our honeymoon in Las Vegas, we saw the same pearl-like iridescent globular disc. And one more time, which this really gets me, but it was it was on our farm, and we were there. Our attorney was with us, and we had heard that some people at White House, they were having a game, and they had seen discs flying over the stadium. So we went out in the field and looked upward, and sure enough, there was a fleet of discs
flying overhead, and our attorney turned to me and said, "Connie, this is for you." And one of the discs dipped, just like that. And that was that day, or that week, I became cognizant of the fact that I was pregnant. I was with child, our first child.
Howard Menger is a truthful person who's had some extraordinary experiences, and as I think he says himself, he cannot explain them, he doesn't understand them.
My impression of Howard Menger was that he was a man who most people would like. He was quiet, he was calm, he appeared to be a very thoughtful man. He would seldom give out with a fast answer. He would consider his words and his answers to every question you would ask him. He was a kind man. He was a kind of a person that you'd like to have as a neighbor. He minded his own business. He was on the quiet side. And that's why I think that he commands so much respect, because people don't expect to have a guy talking about flying saucers who looks and talks like Howard Menger. He's a father figure.
As a psychiatrist, I certainly would say that Howard appears in every way to myself to be a healthy, good citizen, of sound mind and body, as most of these people are. We've done formal studies on this long ago.
It was just logical to assume that there are non-terrestrials throughout our cosmos. And if they are coming now, as they have come in the past, why could not this young man, who had a good business, who had a family life, who was well known in his community, was well respected, why should he go through all this trouble to get ridiculed and harassed and lose a lot of his business? And for what purpose? It certainly wasn't for money. We lost heavily trying to get this message across. He eventually lost his first home, and when we were married, we lost our farm home, and we had to just pull up stakes and start all over again, no home at all, and work very hard. So for all those skeptics out there and debunkers, we get very angry, especially I do, when they say, well, you're doing it for money, or you're trying to sell your book. We have mortgaged our home to publish that book because we didn't want it altered, and we didn't want the photographs to turn up missing again. So we did it ourselves. So this is not a labor of money, it's a labor of love that we have done for 35 to 40 years. So I was convinced at that time that he was doing it for the same reason. He was losing pitifully economically. But something was really pushing him on. And I'm very glad that later on the government came and backed him up to do some of the things he had to do. Unfortunately, it didn't last very long.
Menger's most fascinating adventure with the space people was his trip to the moon in August 1956.
Well, I remember getting in a craft in the same location. We called it Location 1 in Hybridge, New Jersey. They invited me in the craft. And they didn't tell me right away where we were going, but I found myself in outer space with a Polaroid camera, and there were about 8 or 9 people in there with me, aliens, and a man, a friend of mine from Hybridge, New Jersey, who I still don't mention his name because he doesn't want to mention it, but he was in the craft with me. Went to school with him. We were up, we could see through the portholes the Earth getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It looked like a blue tennis ball with white clouds over it. Finally, we could see the moon approaching and getting larger and larger through the portholes, and I took pictures of the moon on the other side of the moon, where there's a line between the light and the dark, and there was like a small city there. And our government knows all of this. They know it all, but they're keeping it from the public. Time is very difficult when you're flying in these aircraft. For instance, there's something I did notice on the moon trip. I thought it took 10 days. But when I come back, I didn't have to shave. So that's less than 8 hours. So there's something here in their technology about time. They're time travelers. As far as I know, their technology is so advanced we may never even have left the planet in a craft. We might have gotten in a craft and through their technology contacted the moon section and put it on a screen, and I thought, who knows? They're so far ahead of us that I really don't know.
Any time that he came back from what he called a contact, he seemed to be very elated, very happy and elated, and just bursting with happiness or goodwill. It seemed to affect him that way.
The early phase of his contacts with the extraterrestrial visitors inspired Menger to develop theories about electromagnetism and gravitation, and to experiment with exotic UFO propulsions on this base.
So what happens in my theory is that the electromagnetic field surrounds the disk, cuts off the cosmic particles coming in, so that gravity, which is a push, my theory, is no longer a push in this area because it rises. Allowing it to rise, it cancels out the push that I call gravity. That's my own explanation. Now, whether it's true or not, you know what, I don't really know. But on that theory, I did get a craft off the ground. 1951 was when things really happened, because I built an anti-gravitic electrodynamic propulsion 4-foot radio-controlled craft, which looked like a flying saucer. And I flew it quite a bit around Hybrids, New Jersey. And one time in the afternoon, it got away. My controls, I lost control of it, the radio control. And it went up about 500 feet and then went west. And I was pushing buttons like mad, and it just didn't respond. It got away. And there goes approximately, today's dollars, $60,000. Now, in those days, money, a dollar was a dollar. And it took me 2 or 3 years, a period of that time, to come up saving that kind of money and buying the parts to build a craft like that. But it was successful because 2 weeks later, FBI agents came out of Newark, New Jersey, to my shop in Washington, New Jersey. I had a machine shop and sign shop there. And they said, Howard Menger? I said, yes. They said, well, we want to tell you that your craft crashed, and they showed me the pieces, on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border, which is several hundred miles from Hybrids, New Jersey. So that's, and it crashed. I don't know whether it hit a tree or what happened. And they traced me from the parts. I bought these parts in electronic shops and hardware stores on Route 22 in New Jersey. And they went to these stores and traced it down. And they're very good at this. And they came right to my shop and said, stop, don't do it again. Keep quiet. You will be visited by some representatives from the Pentagon. They are interested in the propulsion system. So, by the time in the late 50s, they kept coming back in this and that. Now, I didn't put a lot in the book about this because they said not to. But in the 60s, they didn't have a contract, as you spoke of, but they did sponsor me to go to Colorado Springs and actually build, in cooperation with 80 other scientists, engineers, and all types of men who knew what they were doing, build a between 40, 50-foot craft, and it flew successfully. And we were shushed up. None of us could talk. And it was a wonderful experience, all paid for by the government. I have a picture of a Mercedes-Benz that the government paid for me to travel back and forth, Colorado Springs and High Bridge, New Jersey.
The deal with the government had its price. Menger had to leave the UFO movement completely.
Yes, they did silence me. I silenced voluntarily because of national security, which was their biggest reason. And being a patriotic citizen and a veteran of the United States Army intelligence back in World War II, yes, I did keep quiet for security reasons. Because in those days, the Soviet Union was at odds with us. They were our enemies. And they didn't want this technology or any of this out for fear that it would get in the wrong hands and used against us.
For a time there, we had to give it up entirely, any contacts with UFOs and Howard was gone so much of the time. He was involved with the government, which it's very difficult for the family. I want to tell you, when you're dealing in intelligence work, it's very difficult for wife and family because your husband can't tell you exactly what he's doing or where he's going or when and if he's coming back. And that's all left up to conjecture, and it gets to be very uncomfortable at times. And however, that was resolved eventually, and Howard decided to give it all up and just devote his time to me and to the children and to his work until such times it would be more appropriate for us to talk about his experiences and our experiences together.
But his life, his thinking, still was overshadowed by his experiences with the space people. They even influenced the life of his children, Heidi and Eric.
Deeply.
Yeah, the philosophy was probably the best thing they gave me anyway. Mm-hmm. I think it's given me a good open-mindedness and a good stable foundation. That's probably the best thing, if anything, that they gave us.
It gave me the niche to my music because I'm a musician and I went through all types of music from Baroque, opera, jazz, modern music, and the only way I really found the way I wanted to go was through the faith that I have in it. It was really from the core of our family that I got that faith.
You're dealing with a human being who's had an extraordinary experience and is bursting with knowledge and wants to tell all that he knows, but sometimes cannot. And it leaks out over the years, and persistent questioning and going over the events very carefully, trying to remember what I call parables that the non-terrestrials told him, trying to figure it out ourselves, what they meant, what the knowledge was, and realizing that it was we who had to do the searching and find out what it all meant, that we were not going to be given a textbook for aliens. We had to figure it out ourselves. And when we finally did, we found out that we had it in us all the time because we've been seeded by our non-terrestrial ancestors. So it was there. It just had to be probed, which means that we didn't lead an average, normal, everyday life. Although we did this to maintain family, our minds were always probing and always interested in reaching into that exciting field of non-terrestrials and what it really meant to us as humankind, because there's more to us than one can ever imagine.
When the space people ended their contact with Menger in 1958, they left many unanswered questions.
Well, they left. The original angelic people that I talked with years ago in the 50s, in the 30s, A Girl on a Rock, and then the 50s, and the many trips in the craft, They said that they would be back in 2012, that they go in cycles, but I believe that they are time travelers and that they have bases on Venus, Mars, and many other planets. I asked them once, well, where did you come from? And they said, we have just come from the planet you call Venus. Well, that doesn't mean they're Venusians. They're travelers. They might have a base there. When our astronauts went to the moon and they came back, they were not moon men. They traveled there and back. They were Earth people. So who is to say where they come from? The one thing I'm sure is, almost sure, they don't come from this planet. And they're way ahead of us in political, scientific, and religious understanding. I asked them, why are you here? Well, are you here to heal people or solve all our problems and blah, blah, all this? He said, no, it is against our universal laws to interfere in any civilization which we descend upon. Your record, your history shows that your advanced civilizations have advanced on lower civilizations and have destroyed them. They've been here thousands of years ago when there was oceans where there is now land, and where there was then land, there are now oceans. And when they come back, the civilizations have gone down, disappeared, like Atlantis and some of the others. They come back to check on us. They are our ancestors. They helped us to rise up from Homo sapiens to where we are now, to a thinking human being who can make tools and who invent technological things to help humans live a better life. They said that they have laid down laws thousands of years ago that most of them are in our scriptures today. Various Bibles all over the world, holy books all over the world have come, they said, from extraterrestrial contacts, because they were considered gods in those days and looked up to and worshipped. We even made statues that looked like them. And so they said, all we have to do is read our scriptures, live the life it recommends in the scriptures. All the Bibles all over the world said, thou shalt not kill, don't kill. Don't covet your neighbor's wife, don't do that. Love thy neighbor, do that. Moses, Buddha, Jesus, all said all of these things. They were contacted by these aliens, angelic beings also.
Connie Menger believes that there is a strategy behind the proceeding of the extraterrestrials, a program to educate us step by step.
The alien receptiveness program is to gradually make us aware of our birthright, but it has to be a very slow process, and the memory of who we are and what we are is locked in our mythology, it's locked in our ancient scriptures, it's locked in ancient books, it's all over the world. If you will collate the information, you will see the pattern emerge. However, we have to go very slowly because the memory of that has been obliterated from most of humankind. And as a matter of fact, we may have been a quarantined planet for a long stretch of time. And now that we are being monitored again, and some of the brain cells that they so graciously gave us are beginning to expand, and they are beginning to recognize, at least a lot of us are beginning to recognize, we belong to a galactic family. Now what is our purpose? Our purpose is to inform as many people as possible and give some scientific background to that, to show them that there is a possibility that we are not alone and that we come from a very different heritage other than anthropoid. As a matter of fact, we're children of the stars, but we've come through an evolutionary process because that's nature's way of producing better forms for better life expressions. They leak information out either by direct isolated contact cases and or holographic means to get the message out slowly so that the mind has a chance to adjust. There is a mental adjustment that needs to be done, and that needs to be done first on a slow scale, and then as it accelerates, it will become worldwide. And that's where the consciousness upliftment comes in, that if once they know that there is others out there, and they're very much like us, and that's why they're sending those entities that look most like us and are probably very close to us biologically, as I said before, because they're our family. And there is another reason. It must be done slow, on a slow process, because a higher culture will always destroy the lower structure. We have infrastructure in our industries, in our governments, in our religions that would fight so fiercely against this thought or against others coming in, because after all, the vested interests have control of this planet and control of the countries and control of the wealth. They don't want to have to deal with this on a hostile level. It has to be done slowly, and it has to be changing the mental set first.
It's one reason they're here is for a spiritual reason, to develop us more on a spiritual level. Technology is advancing quicker and going further ahead than our spirituality, and that's very dangerous.
Personally, I feel that we have to have a greater reverence for life, all life, greater respect for our planet, greater expression of intelligence between each other, and greater care and responsibility for everything that we do. We have to take responsibility and take charge for what is happening today, because that is the only way we can change it. And once we do these things, we become, I wouldn't like to use the word worthy, we become more receptive to contacts with other people.
Don't you realize we must be aware we're breathing the same air, traveling on the earth, the journey we can share. Oh, what an easy dream to turn the wrong to right.